so that we can make the video available to you on our members-only website at ACWS. So we have a number of resources that are available to shelters there, and you can access any video created from a webinar that we've provided on the website there. Okay, so just give you a quick tour of how you will contribute your questions. So in your webinar window, you'll see that there is the questions box. You can type in your question at any time, where I've indicated with this arrow. And then you can also access two handouts just below the questions window. So I have included a copy of this PowerPoint presentation for you to reference later. And I've also included a copy of our 2014 Outcome Tracker Training Manual. So a lot of what we covered today is available for you to reference there as well. And many shelters have a printed copy of that manual available to staff at their shelters. So I do have to provide a bit of a disclaimer. We have designed this training for sort of the standard practices in Outcome Tracker. So we, as a network, designed standard tools, but many shelters have customized those tools to suit their unique practices, and that's totally okay. But you just might find that not everything is identical to what you see in your Outcome Tracker site. And if that is the case, we want to recommend that you get in touch with your shelter's Outcome Tracker administrator to clarify any differences in data collection processes or the formatting of client forms, that type of thing, just to ensure that you are meeting your shelter's requirements when it comes to data entry. Okay? And just quickly, I'm going to acknowledge we did have one question pop in. So the question is, are we supposed to sign in somewhere? And if you are logged on to this webinar, you have technically signed into the webinar, so there's no need to sign in anywhere else, as long as you're able to view and hear what's being presented to you. Your attendance is documented and all is good, so no need to worry. So I'll give you a quick overview of the training topics we will be touching on today. I'm going to provide an overview of Outcome Tracker support resources and protocols. I will provide an overview of logging into Outcome Tracker, as well as some common login errors and how you can troubleshoot them yourself. I will walk you through accessing client records, so existing client records in Outcome Tracker, as well as creating new client records. How to link families in Outcome Tracker using relationships, so mothers with their children. And then we will go through data entry and definitions for standard fields in Outcome Tracker on the data entry tabs and forms, as well as activities that are pretty standard across the network. And then lastly, we will touch on how to manage records with multiple admissions. So these records include women who have stayed in shelter more than once, who would have, several admissions in shelter, or women who are admitted to more than one program, so they may be admitted to a residential program as well as an outreach program.
Kat, sorry, it's Jen. Can I just interrupt?
Of course.
I can't see your screen, and I don't think there's another individual who's asked the question.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go. I thought it was just me.
Oh dear. Okay. Well, let me just go back then. That's really funny. Sorry, everybody.
I'm going to go back on mute. Thank you, Kat.
Yes, thank you, Jen. I appreciate you letting me know. I'll just go back to this quickly so that you guys can actually see. I had a nice little screenshot for you here. So where you'll share your questions, you can see the questions box, as well as where you can type your questions and access handouts. Great. So thank you. Carrying on. So our goals for this session are that you will be able to log into Outcome Tracker and troubleshoot login issues that you encounter. You'll be comfortable creating and accessing client records in Outcome Tracker. You will be comfortable linking family members through relationships. You will know where you need to go and what steps you need to take in order to enter different types of data into Outcome Tracker that are common to your practice. So some of you may not have to enter everything, and that's okay, but hopefully we cover the essentials that you need to know to do your work in the database. Hopefully you will be aware of some common data entry errors and what steps you can take to avoid making them. You will understand how to manage data for clients with multiple admissions in one or more shelter program, and that you are very aware of the OT support resources available to you, as well as our network protocols for accessing support in the database. Okay. So a quick overview of our Outcome Tracker support resources. So ACWS has developed manuals. So the current iteration is one big manual. We are breaking that manual down into sort of themed manuals because it's getting a little bit out of hand in terms of its size. So we will release those very shortly, but the manual that is current is available to you in the handout section that I pointed out. It's also available on our members-only website. So ACWS has a website where you can log in and access a number of resources. The videos that I've mentioned that are recordings of these webinars, as well as manuals, documents on promising practices in terms of shelter work, copies of a lot of our research materials that we've developed. Tons of stuff are available there. So you can talk to your OT administrator as well as your shelter director about accessing our members-only website. I also mentioned training videos, so we have this video will be included on the website shortly, and we will send out a communications to everyone when the video will be available, and it will link to any additional support resources that will be relevant to you. And there's also the VistaShare support tab, which I will touch on when we log into Outcome Tracker here shortly. But there are a number of support tools there as well. So they have their own manuals they've developed. They have an online help resource, and they have developed their own webinar videos for some of the more advanced features of the database. And I will mention, because we have so many shelters on Outcome Tracker across the province, we were able to negotiate with VistaShare, who's the company that provides Outcome Tracker. They produce the database and they administer the database. We have a licensing agreement with them that ACWS and Outcome Tracker administrators at each shelter will be the first point of contact for any support requests that arise in the database. So rather than contacting VistaShare directly, if you were having an issue, say a difficulty logging into the database, we actually have developed a protocol for you to follow in order for us to minimize the costs of troubleshooting these issues. So step one is to review the OT support resources that are available to you. If you're not able to troubleshoot an issue on your own, please do contact your shelter's OT administrator. Many of them have been working in the database for a long time and are very familiar with common errors in the database and can provide you with support. If they are not able to address the issue that you're experiencing, the OT administrator, can contact our support email. So we have an email, otsupport@acws.ca. So the OT administrator can contact us for support, and finally, if we are not able to troubleshoot the issue, we will contact VistaShare on behalf of shelters. So please keep this in mind when you encounter issues in the database that we have established these support protocols. Yes, I've stated it directly. Please do not contact VistaShare directly, particularly with login issues. Please refer to your OT administrator. Okay, so before we dive in, we'll be moving into the database next, and I'll provide you a bit more background on the database, but have any questions come up at this time that we can touch on, or any comments you have, aside from not being able to see my screen for the first half? Okay, well, let's carry on then. I will open up Outcome Tracker here. So the first step to accessing Outcome Tracker is to go to vistashare.ca. So I mentioned that VistaShare is the company that has developed Outcome Tracker, and we can access the database through vistashare.ca. So I'll just I'll increase the resolution here to ensure that everybody can see. So you'll notice we have the company's website here, and then we have two options to log in. So there's a US login and a Canada login. So VistaShare has both a US server and a Canadian server, and all of our data as Canadian shelters will only be stored on the Canadian server. So in order to access your shelter site, you have to log in using the Canada login. So your OT administrator will have created a unique login user account for you. Generally speaking, it's your first name dot your last name, but confirm with them. Some shelters may choose to define their user accounts differently, and you will enter your password as well. So you'll notice a few things before I actually log in. You'll notice that there's the option to link to the US site, so it says US users log in here. If you notice that there's the option for Canadian users to log in here, it probably means that you're trying to access the wrong server or the wrong site. So please check that out. If you're having issues logging in, that would be the first thing to check. The other thing is if you can't access your account. So if you've attempted a few times to log in and you're not able to access your account, you can use this feature to either send a password reset link or your username information to whatever email address you enter here. Now this email address has to match the email address that was assigned to your login by your OT administrator, so you'll have to know it is most likely your shelter email, but that can also vary from shelter to shelter. So I can enter in my email, oops, and send that information my way. Oops. Okay. Excuse me. So this is Outcome Tracker. So you'll see, I probably see a lot more tabs than you will see as basic users in the database. I am an OT administrator, and so I have access to some of the more advanced features in the database, but I think it's still helpful to know. So this is the My Vista page. This is generally kind of a summary page of your user account, so you can see there's a summary of the reports and queries that exist in that are associated with my login. Frequent activities that I might use are to the right here. There's a calendar, some basic information about myself here on the left under My Info. We have a news tab. This is where VistaShare will share updates about the database. These are generally more relevant to outcome tracker administrators and not frontline staff, but it may be relevant to some of you who use some of the more advanced features in the database. We have the Reports tab here. So this is where you may be accessing basic reports in your shelter site, and you can do so here. And then we have the People and Organizations tab, and this is where the bulk of basic data entry work takes place. So this is where we search for client records. This is where we go when we want to add new data to the database or to access an existing record to do so. I'll just point out here as well a few features of the database. So we have the 3 A's in the upper right corner. We have the small a. And these A's will affect the resolution of what you see in Outcome Tracker. So if I want to make the print bigger, I can hit the big A and then everything becomes a little bit bigger. And that's probably nice for you guys viewing this webinar, so I'll keep it on the large A, but I'll just show you that we also have medium resolution and then the small resolution again, so we'll keep it big. There is also the logout button. So we do advise that when you are not at your computer working in Outcome Tracker, that you are logged out of the database, and that protects the privacy and security of the information that your shelter is recording. And then you can see on the right here a history of recent records that I've accessed. So this is sort of a quick reference. If I want to go into a record that I was in recently, these will all be listed here for me as well. Okay, so now I'm going to touch on the different ways that you can search for records using the People Organizations tab. So every record that's entered into Outcome Tracker gets assigned a role. And roles, you'll see them listed here. These determine what information you can see for a person. So for instance, if somebody is a shelter client, you would assign them the residential role, and then that would determine what data entry tabs you see on that record, but also what data is available to you to enter for that person. So this is one way that we can search for groups of clients. So if I were to choose the residential ACWS adult role, a list of all the records who have that role, that active role, appear for me. So I've got 15 records that have the residential ACWS adult active. Now, we also have inactive roles. Inactive roles aren't as common, depending on, again, your shelter practice, but inactive roles would be somebody who has a role that has been ended. So, for instance, the most common example would be someone who entered shelter, say, 5 years ago, and they entered shelter as a child, and 5 years later, when they entered as an adult, their child role would be ended, so they would be given a role end date, and then a new role would be created for them, and that would be the residential adult role. So we also have the option to search for people only or organizations only. So many shelters track, for instance, requests for admission or calls to the shelter for organizations as well as individuals. So a partner shelter, so in Calgary, for instance, we have a number of shelters in Calgary. They can create a record for a a community partner, and they can track data for that community partner, and that partner would be an organization rather than a person. So if I wanted to produce a list of organizations only, I would first of all go back to searching for all roles, so I won't search for a specific role. I'll search for all. I will choose organizations only from the kind drop-down, and then I will generate a list. And we have a list of all of the shelters in here. Now if I want to just use this text box to search, what I have to first do is ensure that all of my, my prompts, so we have the role prompt here, we have the organization or the kind prompt here. We want to set all of these as a default to all. And that will ensure that we are searching the entire database for whatever record we want to search. So I am going to propose, I guess, a scenario for us to go through our data entry today. And that scenario is that we have the Simpsons seeking admission to our shelter. So we will go through the data entry processes for recording calls and adding client records to the database using the Simpsons as an example. So if I have Marge Simpson phoning my shelter, I will set all of my prompt defaults to all, and I will search for Marge. And I'm going to search a few different ways using this text box just to ensure that I don't accidentally add a duplicate record to the database, that I'm very clear that before I add her to the database, I've determined she is not in there. So you'll notice that when I searched for Margaret, I did have one record that was highlighted, so it did find Margaret, but this is not Margaret Simpson or Marge Simpson that we were looking for. So the last thing I'll do is, rather than search for her first name, I'll also search for her last name, which will probably be a bit easier. And we'll see that there are no records in the database for Marge Simpson. So I'm pretty sure that I can add Marge Simpson to the database as a new client record. Okay, so I'm going to take a break. I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes or so in case you do have questions and you want a second to organize them and type them out before we move on to adding Marge Simpson's record. So I will be back in 2 minutes, and I'll touch base with Jen then to see if you guys have submitted any questions, okay? Okay, so Jen, has anyone submitted any questions, or should we continue?
I don't see any questions, so I think you are safe to go ahead, Kat.
Excellent. Okay, so we've just wrapped up how to use the People Organizations tab to search for existing client
Kat,
records.
one just came in.
Ah, perfect.
So if you like, I can read it out right now.
Sure, that sounds great.
Question is, what are other shelters using the organization tab for?
The organization tab for. So do you mean when they create organization records? So when I was searching for organizations only, oops, we'll pull up that list. So most often, and I'll answer this, clarify if I'm interpreting this incorrectly, but organizations are usually created for another organization who might be requesting information as on behalf of a woman. So they may have somebody that they're serving who needs admission to the shelter, and they might make a request for admission on behalf of that person. They might be phoning to get more information about different types of programming that your organization offers. So if your shelter wants to track calls and not necessarily assign them to an individual who works for an organization, but just track them under that organization itself, then you can create an organization record. And you can do so in the same way that we create a person record. Under tasks on the right here, you have the option to add a new organization or add a new person. So I just want to, I'm keeping an eye on the question window here to see if this question's evolving at all. You can absolutely use the database to track donations from other organizations as well. So tracking donor information, absolutely. That can be a customization that you would make in your site. It's not a default design element in Outcome Tracker, so we don't necessarily have standard tools that ACWS has created to support shelters tracking that information, but we can support you if you want to develop those tools for yourselves. Does that answer the question? I hope it does. Okay, so we have another
one.
Yeah, they're flying.
Yep.
Great.
You're ready to go to the next one?
Yeah, just I'll let you ensure that I'm answering them in order. Is that okay, Jen? Do you mind reading out the next one?
Yeah, you bet. We are wondering, when you end a child role, do we have to do that manually, or does it change by itself once the individual comes back as an adult?
So you have to do that manually. So Outcome Tracker can't really recognize roles in the database that are like related, so they can't tell that, you know, somebody shouldn't have both an active child role and an active adult role. So you would have to go in and manually end the child role. And I can point that out once we start a record where you can do that if you'd like.
It looks like you've answered the organizations.
Perfect. Okay, so just to summarize, we've made a few attempts to search for Marge Simpson, and we have looked at different ways that we can use the People Organizations tab to find lists of records or individual records. Now I'm going to go ahead, because I'm confident that Marge Simpson isn't in our database, I'm going to add her to the database as a new person. So that happens under tasks. So that is in the right of the People Organizations tab. We'll go to add a new person. And we get a pop-up window where we will enter that person's name. I don't know Marge Simpson's middle name, so I'll just enter her first and last name. And then we have to select a role in order to be able to see and enter data that we need to enter to track our interactions at this point with Marge Simpson. So the most common entry point for women into our database is usually as a caller. Some shelters will use the potential client role as well. So you have the option between the caller role and the potential client role, and I will use the caller role, but I'll just show you that further down the list we also have a potential client role. Okay, so I verified the spelling of Marge Simpson's name. I'm sure that I'm adding her as the caller role, and I'm going to go ahead down here and add her record. Okay, so this is where it takes me as the default. It takes me into the Roles tab in Marge Simpson's record. And this is a great place to default to because we have to do a few things with the roles before we move on to other data entry. And one of the first things we have to do is we have to ensure that the begin date, so you'll notice this column here, the begin date associated with the caller role has to match the date that the call was received. And so if we are, and this happens very often, shelters might decide on Friday that they do all of the data entry for the previous week, that they assign sort of an admin day to do their data entry. That's great. But we have to make sure that we backdate our data entry to reflect the day that a call was actually made or a woman actually entered shelter. So let's say, for instance, that Marge actually phoned us on March 25th. So I can go ahead and update this date and then select the update button here to save those changes. And you will get a blue pop-up, as you just saw, that alerts you that your changes have been saved. So to answer the question about ending roles, if we had, for instance, the child residential role here, and we wanted to end that role, we can do so by entering an end date in this column. So let's say, for instance, we were to do that. And then I hit update. Oops. A tricky thing about end dates is that in order for your end date to deactivate a client record is that it actually has to go back one day. So if I end the role for today, you'll notice that the status remains active. But if I were to enter yesterday's date and select update, it now becomes inactive. And that's what we would want to do. But for our purposes, with the caller role, in the case of Marge Simpson, what I'm going to do is just keep her end date empty and keep her caller role active. And there's no need really to deactivate the caller role at any time. And I'm just going to take a quick sip of water here. Sorry. Okay. So we have confirmed all the details about her caller role, and now we can move on to some of the data entry that we want to do for our callers. Most importantly, we want to document the caller contact that we received from this individual. Excuse me. Okay, so you'll see some of our formatting is a little bit wonky in our site, and this is because we just do a lot of experimenting in our forms. So you'll notice like the first name is off over to the right and whatnot, but most things here are pretty standard to what you would expect to see. So with call contacts, we have to assign a type of program that has received the call contact. Most shelters are documenting call contacts for their emergency shelters. Some shelters may have both an emergency and a second stage shelter. But we've set the type of program question to default to the emergency residential dropdown. You'll notice that this is already populated with that option. Sorry, my throat's a little dry. But if I were to choose this drop-down arrow, a whole list of options come up, of standard options. So if you are documenting a call contact for a second stage program as opposed to an emergency residential program, you'll have to update this question to second stage. Okay, so we'll proceed, assuming that this is a call for an emergency residential program. I will enter all the basic information that we need to track. We will say this is Calgary. We will choose a province. So this is a field that is quite important, and you will notice a lot of these fields will have alerts around them. So this is actually a separate field, but we have, for instance, gender of contact. This is a field that is required for our provincial reporting. And we've indicated that this is a required field using what we call a form action. So we created a business rule to notify you that certain questions on this field have to be completed. Okay. So Marge is female. You may have in your shelter a specific program name assigned to your shelter, so it is an emergency residential shelter, but it is perhaps also assigned another name by your organization, in which case you would answer here. So we could say, for instance, in our case it's residential, but it could be Sheriff King Home. So the emergency residential shelter at the YWCA of Calgary is called Sheriff King Home, and that option may appear in your program name field. You want to document that you are the person taking this call or contact. You want to document the length of the contact that you're having with an individual. So in the case of an admission request, this may be a longer call, and we certainly want to document, if you spent an hour and a half on the phone with somebody supporting them through crisis or helping them access the services they need. In the case of an information request, it could be 15 minutes, but that is still an important item of data that we want to track. So we'll say in this case that we spent 90 minutes. You'll notice that we're requesting that you complete this in minutes, not hours. So an hour and a half would translate to 90 minutes. And then further down the list, we get to the type of request. So this is another one of those provincial reporting requirements that is designed around standard options for tracking calls and contacts. So we have a list of, I believe, 5 options. We have the residential admission request, which is the option that you would choose if anybody is seeking space or services from your shelter. We have the information request. So this would be for anyone who is inquiring about services and programs without necessarily asking to participate in those services and programs. There is crisis support, and that would be really a lot of the work that shelters do. So somebody who contacts your shelter or contacts your crisis line looking for support, and again is not necessarily seeking space, but is requesting your assistance in accessing some sort of service either in the community or elsewhere. Then we have client-related calls. So these are calls that are received that are related to an existing client that you would want to track. And then we have the other options. So if something just doesn't quite fit into any of those categories we've mentioned, you can choose other. And you have the option to specify yourself what type of request you are receiving. So what I'm going to do is walk you through some of the data entry. So depending on what type of request you choose from this list, you'll be asked to answer different questions about that call or contact because there's specific information that we only need in the case of a residential admission request or in the case of an information request. We don't need everybody to answer those questions, just those who are asking for those specific types of services. So we will start with the other option. So if I choose other, you'll notice that a new question pops up titled type of request is if other, and that's where you can specify that other type of request that just didn't quite fit into those categories. And since I'm not very familiar with all the types of requests that shelters receive, I will just enter gibberish there. Now, if I want to go back and change my type of request, what I have to do first is empty out the data that I've entered for this follow-up question first. Because you'll notice what happens now that I change my option here is that that question disappears. But let me just open it back up again. If I were to leave data here and then change my selection in the type of request, what I'm doing is leaving that data hidden in the form incorrectly. So we don't want that data to be tracked for this person, but if I change the type of request without emptying that field first, it will be tracked incorrectly. So we sort of work backwards through these questions if we ever have to change a question that's at a higher level, so one of those initial questions. So I will delete type of request if other before I proceed to changing my my type of request to client-related call. So for a client-related call, there is no follow-up required in terms of answering other questions. For crisis support as well, there's no additional information required. So if you're tracking crisis support, you can carry on through the form. If you select information request, we do ask for a bit more detail about the type of information that's sought. And this also helps you understand a little bit more like when to use the type of request options. So somebody's phoning for agency information, program or service information, general information about family violence. We have information about donations, and then we have the other information type as well. And you'll notice this question differs a little bit from the type of request question. So obviously somebody phoning for information can seek multiple types of information, and in those cases you have the option to select as many of these choices that fit for the information that that person is seeking. However, the type of request option, somebody really can only be phoning for one major type of request. So you can still provide information to people who are seeking a residential admission request, but ultimately we're most concerned with knowing about just the residential admission request or just the crisis support call. So you only have the option to choose one in this case. And you'll be able to tell the differences between these types of questions based on how they're displayed. So you'll see that the type of request, we just have one option showing in the list, and there's a drop-down arrow next to it that allows you to make your selection, and just one is highlighted. Whereas the type of information provided if requested, if information request, is a box with multiple options that can be selected. So I'll just point out a quick data entry trick. If you hold down your control key on your keyboard and click different options with your mouse, you can choose more than one at the same time. If you, and then if you just want to choose one, you don't need to hold down control. You can just select the option that you want. So again, since I want to empty out any data that I've entered here, I'm going to hold down the control key and choose the highlighted information, and now I've emptied out all the data that I've entered into this question, before I go back to review the residential admission request options. So this is the final type of request that we're going to review together. And this is one that is particularly important for shelters to report to their funders. So we want to keep track of residential admission requests, and we also want to know how many of those requests are admitted to shelter versus not admitted to shelter. And so once you've indicated that you are documenting a residential admission request, we have a series of questions that we have to answer depending on whether or not a woman is admitted or not admitted. So in this case, let's start by going through the not admitted options. And you'll see again, the if admission request field is a single drop-down, a single select drop-down as opposed to the multi-select box because someone can't be both admitted and not admitted. So we'll choose not admitted, and now you'll see that additional questions come up for us to answer. So if she's not admitted, we want to know the reason if she requested admission but was not admitted. And we have a series of standard options again. So we have unable to accommodate due to capacity. So shelters have a limited number of beds, and those beds might be full, or some of those beds might be unavailable. And so if there really just isn't space to accommodate a woman, we will choose that we are unable to accommodate her due to capacity. It could be that she does not meet the priority level established by a program. So for some shelters where there is a very, very high demand for services, they have defined a very specific population that they will accommodate in shelter. So that doesn't mean that they won't provide other services. It just means that women have to meet certain needs in order for them to qualify for, well, not qualify, but you know what I mean, be a member of that population that the shelter serves in-house. It could be that admitting this individual, this woman, might put another individual in shelter at risk. So it could be that you know, there's an instance of mutual abuse. So a woman already residing in shelter is abused by a woman seeking admission to the shelter or has been abused by that individual. And in that case, that wouldn't be appropriate for the shelter to accommodate both those women at the same time necessarily. And lastly, it could be that a program is not able to accommodate unique needs for that individual. So it could be, there could be health concerns that the shelter isn't able to serve. It could be that there are access issues with the facility, and so the shelter just really isn't able to accommodate specific needs, and they would support that individual to find services better suited to them and what they need. So let's go through the unable to accommodate due to capacity. So if I make this as my selection, so shelter is full and we just don't have space. Again, I am asked to answer some more questions. So this is a detailed question again. So we just want to know specifically, is it that there's no available bedroom, or would we exceed government approved capacity? So your shelter may be assigned, you know, maybe you have 3 cots available, but you have maximum capacity and just can't put anybody, any new heads and beds in your shelter. And so in that case, we would choose would exceed government capacity. And then we have another option again. So if you were to choose other, you would be able to specify. So again, we have one last question before we move on. In the case of women who are not admitted to shelter for whatever reason, one question we do want to answer is the number of dependent children who were turned away with that woman. So in this case, I know Marge Simpson has 3 kids, but for simplicity's sake, we will just choose 1. And so now we're tracking not only the women who are turned away from our shelter, but we're also tracking the number of children who are turned away from our shelter at any given time. So before we carry on, what I'm going to do is we're actually eventually going to admit Marge Simpson to our shelter so that we can do all the other data entry that we have to do. But in order to do so, I first have to go back and delete all of the data that I've entered here. So with these drop-down questions, if you choose the click to select and move backwards that way, now I can choose admitted to program, and I'm not accidentally leaving any incorrect data on my call contact form. So just, I know I'm really hitting this point home, but just remember to work backwards through these questions that are linked in order to prevent data entry errors. Your OT administrator will thank you. Okay, so we have type of request is a residential admission request. We are admitting Marge to our program. And there are a number of questions here. These may not all apply to you and your shelter, so I'm really just going to focus on those questions that are part of our standard data set. And I believe that we've touched on them all. All of the highlighted questions have been answered. So now I can go and I can choose Save. And you'll see the pop-up here notifying me that my call contact has been saved. And you'll also notice that that call contact now appears in a list to the right of the data entry form with the date, the staff person's name who took the call, that is me, and then the type of shelter or program that the call was recorded for. Okay, so I'm going to take another 2-minute pause and let you guys compile any questions. I know a few questions have come up since we started talking, so I'll just give anyone else who has a question a couple of minutes to organize their question, and then we'll go through questions that have come up in the last few minutes, okay? Okay, Jen, since you've been diligently watching the questions box, do you want to take us through some questions that have come up?
Sure. And you know, there was just one, there was a comment about, it was more a technical thing about can you see my screen? And I thought I'd just clarify, it's probably just your screen that everyone can see as opposed to all of our lovely faces. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, it's just me.
Great. Okay, so your first question, when entering program admitted to, I have been putting helpline. Would it be better to put residential?
So that question, that is referring to this program name question. So the program name question is totally custom to the shelter, and the shelter is welcome to use whatever drop-down option from this list that best suits their processes. So helpline is a great choice, and as long as you're consistent in how you use it, it should meet any reporting needs that you have. The question that as a network we need to be answered in a standard way is this type of program. And this question isn't customizable. This is like, these are all the network choices that we've designed for every shelter. So everyone has the same options there. And it allows us to track requests for admission for a specific shelter type or a specific program type for everybody. So ACWS will take the data that you guys have entered here and we can roll it up across the province anonymously, so we won't see any of the identifying information, but we can aggregate it using your responses to this question as a filter. So as long as you are answering the type of program in a standard way, and you are welcome to answer the program name any way that you like. That's all I have to say about that one.
All right. Your next question is, do we support to program, even if it's a call and the women and child are stating they will come into the shelter but have not yet?
Yes. So we track actual admissions separately using the admission form and the all of those activities. So we'll use the residential roles to track that and the admission form to track that. We're really more concerned on the calls contacts of the number of people that you extended an admission request to. And a lot of shelters use this question as well. Not everybody uses it, but this may be something that your shelter wants to look at. We have the question, client withdrew request for admission. So you can document that somebody was admitted to your program, and that says that you guys extended them services, and that's great. And maybe they just decided they didn't want to come, and so you could also choose client withdrew request for admission, and then you would capture those people who were admitted but didn't actually come to stay with you. Is that all the questions?
I think that's it. You're good to go.
Okay, cool. So I'll just undo this here and hit save again before we move on. So just to review, we have admitted Marge Simpson to our emergency residential shelter. And in order for us to admit her to shelter, we have to go back to that roles tab, and we have to add her or assign her a new role that will allow us to see and enter data associated with somebody staying in the shelter. So we have specific forms that we need to use in order to track that information. So under the roles tab here, I'm going to go to add. I will choose the standard role, which is the residential adult role. And then if I want, you'll see that it defaults to today's date, but if she came to shelter on March 28th, 3 days after her call, I will want to document the appropriate begin date that matches her admission date and hit add. Okay. So now we've got two roles here. We've got the two begin dates here reflecting kind of those first points of service. And you'll see that we have some new data entry tabs that have appeared. So we have a residential intake and a residential discharge, an admission summary tab, etc. Okay, so before we enter data for Marge, we are going to return to the People Organizations tab because Marge is entering shelter with Bart. Bart's coming into shelter with Marge, and we want to connect them as a family before we go through the data entry process. And I'll explain why in just a moment. So I'm going to go back to the People Organizations tab. I'll click that. I will have a quick search here. So again, I'm going to go to all of my prompts and ensure that I've selected all. And I will just type in Bart's name to ensure that he's not already in the system. And really, I can't think of any other way that Bart might be spelt. We can do a quick check for his last name, Simpson. Of course, Marge shows up, but we don't want to put Bart's data in Marge's record, so we're going to create a new record for Bart. So I'm going to go back to tasks. You'll remember that we go to add new person. I will enter Bart's name, and I will choose the residential child role for Bart and hit add. Okay. So I'm going to go, this time it didn't default me to Bart's roles tab, so I have to go there manually and backdate his role begin date. So he also entered shelter on March 28th, 2016. That may not always be the case. Sometimes kids will come to shelter later than their moms, and in that case you would just enter whatever date they actually came to shelter. It doesn't have to match. Okay, so I've got the correct role here for Bart. I've got the correct role begin date for Bart. And now I'm going to go to the Relationships tab, where I will link Bart with Marge. So their two records will be joined as a family. So I will hit add. I will select the relationship. So we've got a number of relationships designed into the site. But the one we are most interested in this case is the family member, primary family member. So the family member is the relationship that will be assigned to Bart as the dependent or the child. So Bart Simpson is a family member of, and then in this box I can start typing Marge's name, and her record appears, and I can select that record and hit finish. And we don't have to worry about begin and end dates here necessarily, but you'll see that Bart Simpson is a family member of Marge Simpson, and that Marge Simpson's name is blue, and when I hover over it, it underlines, which means that I can click on it and link now back to Marge's record. So you can see at the top here, now I'm in Marge Simpson's record, and I see that Marge Simpson is the primary family member of Bart Simpson. So the nice thing is, often when you're serving a family, you have data that you can enter for more than one family member kind of at a time. So, you had a meeting, say you did a parenting session, for instance, with Marge and Bart, and you want to enter case notes for both of them. You can use the Relationships tab to move back and forth more quickly between their records by clicking on their names, as opposed to going into People Organizations and searching for them in order to open their records and enter the case notes or any other data that you need to enter to document your work with them. So now I'm going to go back to Marge Simpson's record, and we can go through the whole process of completing an intake for Marge. And we'll do so on the Residential Intake Adult tab. So again, we have a lot of additional fields on this intake that not everybody may have in their shelters. So I'm going to focus on the questions on this form that are most relevant to the data that we collect as a network in a standard way, and the data that's required for your shelter to meet any reporting requirements they might have using the standard data set. So we have the program name. This is that same program or same question from the calls contacts form that is totally customizable for your shelters. So, you know, you may choose residential, you may choose helpline, you may choose a custom shelter name that you have designed onto, your OT admin has designed onto this list, and that's totally fine. You're at total liberty to use this program name field in the way that your shelter wants to use it in a standard way. Again, we have to select the staff person that is completing this form. You'll see that the default, again, for the type of program question is emergency residential. So you may want to change that to second stage if you prefer, totally up to whatever program you're entering the data for. We have the primary family member field. So in this case, Marge is admitted to shelter with one child, and so she is a primary family member. And you'll remember that from when we defined the relationship. We said that Bart Simpson is a family member of Marge Simpson, and that means that Marge Simpson is the primary family member of Bart Simpson. If Marge were to enter shelter alone without any dependents or any children, then we would choose no for this question. But because she did enter with one child, we'll choose yes. Sorry, I'm muting myself occasionally just to take a swig of water because my throat's a little dry, so sorry if that's distracting. You'll see on this form that we have some of her basic address information is carried over from the data we entered on the calls contact, which is great. So unless this information is changed, you don't have to update this data, but say, you know, Marge's address changed between the time she called and the time that she was admitted to shelter, you could update it here and that would be no problem. You'll notice, so we've indicated that her province is Alberta in her address. And associated with that question is the region question. So the region question is a list, and it's only answered for women with address information based on Alberta. But you'll see all of the Child and Family Service regions are listed here. So we have region 1, 2, 3 through 10. And we have an NA option for those women who are coming from Saskatchewan or BC or Ontario or any other province. But we will select Calgary and area because that's where I'm living these days. If you're unsure what region to select, so Marge is coming from a community that you're just not very familiar with in terms of where it falls in or out of, you know, these boundaries. We've designed a link into the form that allows you to access the Human Services website. So it will open up in a new tab for you. And you can search from this list. It's the list of all of the communities in Alberta. So let's go with Beacon Corner. We'll hit search. And it tells me that it's located in Region 7. And so I can go back here and I can select Region 7. So that's a nice little feature. Okay. Continue down. Again, we have emergency contact information. Your shelter may or may not collect a lot of this information, so I won't spend too much time on it. But when we get to the admission information section of the form, there's a lot of important data that we need to collect here. So we have the admission date. So I believe that was March 28th. We'll enter that here. Once it's complete, you'll see that that flag has left you, so you've done well in completing a data entry field that's required. We will have to select the family composition. So again, we are admitting a family versus a single client. We will document the referral source. So this is quite an exhaustive list. Most options are pretty straightforward, so I won't go through all of them. But if you do have any questions, you can discuss those with your OT administrator. And if they're not clear, they can contact us and we can clarify any of these categories that don't seem clear to you. So we'll say that a family member referred Marge. We are interested in Marge's age, and so we do want to track her birth date. So we'll enter, for your information, that's my birthday. We want to know gender. We also are interested in Marge's background information. Now, we used to collect this information with a different question that wasn't necessarily, these are always challenging questions to ask about how people identify in terms of their backgrounds. And so we have designed this question really just to identify populations who may have service needs that are associated with their backgrounds, or may have additional, may benefit from additional supports out in the community, depending on, you know, whether they have a language barrier or have any immigration concerns that they would need support with. So that's how this new question has been designed. It's another one of those conditional questions. So we asked, does a client self-identify as Aboriginal? And they can identify yes as Aboriginal, no as Aboriginal, or choose not to answer and provide that information, and that's totally okay. In the case that somebody does identify as Aboriginal, we ask for a bit of additional information about their background. So if a client is Aboriginal, if they can specify whether they are First Nations, Métis, or Inuit, and if that specific question or response to that question is unknown, they can select unknown, and that's totally okay. And we are interested in knowing whether this individual would normally or ordinarily reside on reserve or off reserve. And again, unknown is a response choice there, as well as yes or no. So I'm going to just unselect all of these options. So again, because we are going to change our response to this initial question, we have to remove all the data we've entered to these follow-up questions in order to return to this top question and change it. So if a client doesn't self-identify as Aboriginal, we are interested in understanding whether that client was born in Canada or not. So if they were born in Canada, then we're not collecting any more information. If they were not born in Canada and they choose no, we're interested in understanding the length of time they have spent in Canada, residing in Canada. So it could be less than a year, it could be between 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 5, or over 5 years. Again, there's always the option to not answer these questions. They are sensitive questions, and this information may not be known, and that's perfectly fine to select unknown as well. Okay, so we will just say that Marge has been in Canada between 2 and 3 years. So we have a bunch of questions that may or may not be in your forms. Some demographic questions. So if your shelter is participating in any of the ACWS research projects, there may be additional what we would call stability factor questions. So we may be interested in collecting or understanding more about whether a woman has access to income, whether she is employed, what level of education she's achieved. So if there are any barriers to her gaining employment, if she wants employment. Sources of income, so what income is available to her. There are some legal questions here as well that your shelter may or may not track, but if they are providing legal support, it may be helpful to track this information. And then we come to abuse history, and we have some more questions in red. So some more questions that we would like to be able to answer as often as possible across the province because they support advocacy work that ACWS does on behalf of shelter work in the province. So we are interested in knowing if an individual has stayed in the shelter in the past, so if they are returning to shelter. So again, we have the choice of yes, no, or unknown. If they choose yes, we're interested in knowing a bit more information about their previous admissions. So in the past, so the last time that Marge stayed in shelter, did she return to the same relationship when she was discharged or following her discharge at any time? And if she said yes, then we have a multi-select, and this is just a different formatting for the multi-select, so your OT administrator can customize how these questions display on your forms to help you guys with your data entry. So in this case, we have a radio list here. We want to know what the reasons were that the client returned to the same relationship. So was it more of a personal choice, or were there some barriers that were a factor in making that choice? So for instance, lack of money or finances, lack of affordable housing, lack of long-term housing options, etc. And personal choices, maybe my family, still having hope for the relationship, etc. And again, we have that other option where you can, if response a woman provides doesn't quite fit, you are welcome to enter in any reason that she provides as well. But in this case, Marge did not stay in the shelter in the past. This is her first admission, so I'm just going to go through again. Oops. Unselect everything I've done here, and select that, and now change my response to no. Okay, and now we have the types of abuse experienced leading to admission. This again is a multi-select, so any number of options can be selected here. We do in the manual, I believe, have definitions for each of these response choices. So if you are unclear how to answer this question, you can refer to the manual for some of the definitions, or consult your OT administrator, and obviously they can consult us if anything is unclear, and we can provide you with support around responding to these questions. Keep scrolling. We did it. Excellent. So I will hit save. So again, we've just reviewed all of the questions. There will be additional questions on your form, but all of these questions that we've answered are questions that inform the data set that shelters across the province have agreed upon in terms of information that's important to understand, to improve services, deliver services, and advocate on behalf of shelter work. And there are also questions that support some of the reporting requirements that many shelters have in their contracts with various funders. So just a little bit of background there. These are important questions to answer to the best of your ability. Okay, so that is the admission form. And that took a while to get through, so I'm going to take another quick break, another 2 minutes or so, and let you guys put together any questions you have about this form before we move on to case notes. Okay, so I do see one question, Jen. Were there any others?
No, I just see the one, looks like. So I will read that one out for you. Hopefully I'll read it out properly to clarify.
Okay.
So the question is, I'm not too sure if this was covered already. If child care is case noting for a child and had no contact with the mother, does the case not go under the mother's case notes or the child?
That's a really good question, and I'm not as familiar with some of the service-specific questions like that, so I might follow up via email if that's okay. I do think it would be tracked in the client's record, but I know too that many shelters would probably be informing mom of interactions with kids. So that there might be either documenting that case note in both records or possibly documenting it in mom's records. So I would like to consult Susan and Irene, who are a little bit more familiar with shelter work, before I give you a firm answer on that, if that's okay. So I'll make a note to send you an email with my response.
Okay, and I think that's it for questions.
Okay. Just making a quick note here before I move on. Okay. So we have admitted Marge to shelter, and we've completed all of those required fields or questions that we need to inform our reporting on her services received. And now we will go on to the case notes. So Case notes are where we document contacts. Everyone's familiar with case notes, I think, but contacts we have with people residing in shelter while they're there. And so we have to, these are again very customized shelter to shelter. So I'm going to use the case notes as more of an opportunity to show you some of the different features that you can use on all forms that kind of help with data entry more than anything. So we have the note author, the note entered by. So some people may have somebody entering notes on their behalf. In this case, it doesn't differ, and you may not have both these questions. We'll want to enter the date of the note. So again, if you are a shelter staff who doesn't necessarily enter their case notes right into Outcome Tracker, they take notes on paper, and then maybe every couple of days they update their case notes in the database. Then you will want to make sure that you update the date of your note to reflect the date of your contact with that individual. And I do want to advise that some shelters have, so I'm saying that you might enter them later, but some shelters may have firm policies around when a case note is entered. So if that's the case, please follow your shelter policies and ignore what I'm saying. And yeah. So anyway, we'll just pretend that I'm a couple days behind, and I will enter this case note for March 28th. The task duration, so I will document the amount of time I spent around this, I guess, point of service or unit of service that I provide to Marge. So I may spend some time prepping, and I may spend some time with her in person, and if that's the case, I want to enter sort of that full amount of time here. So we had an hour. An hour of my time was spent around my service with her. I may have traveled, so I may be accompanying Marge to court, for instance, and that may require me documenting some travel time. So I could say it was 10 minutes there, 10 minutes back, so a total of 20 travel minutes. And again, I just want to emphasize that we record everything in minutes here, not in hours. So we have the type of note questions. So we have a direct contact with a client. So that would be a face-to-face contact, maybe more of a counseling session or work together with a woman. And then there's indirect work, so work that takes place on a client's behalf. So it could be that you are providing supported referrals for a woman, so making calls on her behalf to other service providers. So that could be documented as indirect work on the client's behalf as opposed to direct work. Or you could be consulting a colleague on some type of service that you want to provide. So you're having a case consultation. That could be an example of indirect work on a client's behalf that you would want to document. So in this case, let's choose direct contact with the client. And then on the type of note detail, we can say, okay, so this was an intake screening, supporter case management, provision of basic needs. I'm not as familiar with travels. It could be that you're documenting your discharge session with a woman, or that you are advocating with the woman present as well. So in this case, we can document that this is an intake and screening. We can document other services that were provided over the course of contact. So we probably did some safety planning. We did some transportation. And again, I'm holding down that control key so that I can select multiple options. So we have another, we did an assessment at the time of intake, so I'll document that. Our shelter, while I completed the intake, provided childcare to her children, so I want to also document that childcare was provided. Oops. Yeah, so that covers it, I think. We have the type of contact question, so you can document that this was an in-person contact. It could also be by phone. And then we have the indirect options here as well, so by fax, online, or no contact. And I'll just skim through these because a lot of these may or may not apply to your shelter. Some questions that are particularly relevant, so if you are a staff person at a second stage shelter, we have the safety planning information section here. So any time that safety planning work is done with a woman, we want to track the specifics of that work because it's such a big part of shelter work. It's very rare, we know this anecdotally, that some discussion of safety isn't discussed with a woman over the course of her stay, or even at each contact that's had with a woman. So at the time of intake, we were probably developing a safety plan versus changing an existing safety plan. So at intake, we'll be developing a safety plan. And then we have all of these options here to track specifics about that work. So we may have contacted police. We may have discussed safety technology. There's a whole list of options here. Sorry, I keep zooming in. Carried out safety planning for children, that type of thing. And again, holding down control so I can select multiple choices in the multi-select box. And then I will enter my notes about the contact here. And the last thing I will do, and this is quite important, not every shelter is doing this in a standard way, but if your shelter does use this enrollment link field, I will point this out. The enrollment link allows you to take this case note and link it to the admission form for the woman's entry into that program. So it could be that a woman has been to shelter several times, and so we want to ensure that we track case notes in a way that allows us to attach it in reporting to the information that she provided on that specific intake form, because a lot of that information can change. So for instance, her abuse history leading up to her admission may be different, her address may be different, her sources of income may have changed over that period of time, and so we want to just make sure that the case note work that we do links to specific intake information. It could also be that she is in both an outreach program and a shelter program at the same time, and in that case we would see both a residential intake here with her residential admission date and an outreach follow-up program here with her outreach follow-up date. So she could be in both programs at the same time. That happens frequently at some shelters. And so we'd want to make sure that we're not mixing up her residential case notes with her outreach case notes, so we want to keep those separate. And we would use this enrollment link question to do that. So I'll hit save. So you'll see the pop-up lets me know that I've saved my case note without any issue. I can also, and not every shelter does this, but I can also save and lock. So if you have a save and lock option, please talk to your OT administrator about using that option, because what it can do is save your case note in a way that others can't change it by accident. So we have now, you see that I can't change any of the data that was documented here. It's totally locked. Okay, so that's the basics. And what I'm going to show you now is how to copy from an existing case note in order to update it and create a new case note, which is a nice feature because a lot of what's entered on the case note is often the same, so it doesn't change very much. So right now I'm on the case note that I just created. So over here in the list, I see that this case note is bolded and there's an arrow next to it. And if I choose copy, it allows me to create a copy of the case note I just made. But now I can edit some details. So I can change the date. So let's say this is March 29th this time. Now I met with her for 45 minutes and there was no travel time. I'm no longer doing an intake or screening. I'm doing ongoing support in case management. And our work was more around advocacy, financial support, and information provision. So, yeah. And then let's say now I am changing an existing safety plan. So we've got our baseline safety plan established, but now we're going to make some changes. So let's say I made some referrals at this meeting. And I provided an informal safety check and or plan. And I would update my note and again confirm that I have linked to the appropriate admission form. And now I can hit save and lock. Okay, then I get my blue pop-up. The blue pop-ups we like. They tell us that everything went well. And now you can see the list of case notes. So I'm currently in terms of the data that's showing up on the form, I'm in the most recent case note that I just copied, but I can also click here and open that first case note I made. And you could have 100 case notes here and they would all show up in a list with the most recent on top. And it would provide you with those basic details of what date it was created, who the author of that note was, and the type of contact, which allows you just to search more easily for old case notes. So if you want to go back to, say, a case note that happened on March 1st, you can search for it easily by date and then by those details to look it up. Okay, so that is the case note. I'm going to take another break, but actually I kind of want to suggest, I realize now that it's been almost 2 hours. I didn't think we'd go all the way to 12:30, but we just might. So I apologize for that. But why don't we take 5 minutes this time, and that gives anybody a chance if they want to sneak off to the washroom or grab a sip of water, that they have a bit more time to do so, and then we will chat about the questions that came up about the case notes. And I'm sure there will be a few, because this is a lot of the work that shelters do. So we'll see you guys back here in 5 minutes. Okay, that was a nice little break. Jen, are there any questions?
Yes, sorry, I was just swallowing. Yeah, you do have one.
Okay.
And it is, are we able to delete a case note once it has been entered if one has been entered or created in error? So for example, on a discharged client.
Yeah, so there are ways in Outcome Tracker to delete those case notes, but I have to advise that before deleting a case note, so case notes, they are legally relevant documents, and so some shelters, and I mean depending on like someone's, if you are a member of the College of Social Workers, there are sort of processes around making changes to how you document or have documented your work with a woman. So I do recommend that if you've created a case note in error or need to modify a case note, that that is done in consultation with either your supervisor or your OT administrator, and they can work with you to change or delete that case note in a way that kind of meets all of those other rules and regulations around managing client information. Does that make sense? Because I don't really feel like it's up to me to show you how to delete potentially sensitive information in Outcome Tracker without those other individuals involved. So, yeah. Was that clear, Jen? Did I explain that properly?
Yep, and you
Okay.
just got a note back that says that makes perfect sense.
Oh,
Thank
good.
you for that.
Awesome. Cool.
And that looks like it's it for questions for this
Okay.
topic.
Cool. I'm shocked, but that's good. Hopefully everyone's understanding. Okay. So the next thing we'll review, and we won't spend too much time on this, but is the activity list. So it may be in a different place in your client record, but ours is just next to the case note. And so you'll see a list of sort of the activities, the data entry activities we've already started for Marge. So we've got a couple of case notes in there. We've got her call contact form, and then we've got her admission form all started here. So the activities list is where we go to enter data that's not necessarily on a tab, and that's usually data that is associated with like an assessment tool or an outcome measurement tool. So a good example would be the danger assessment. We would go to the activity list to enter the danger assessment. Now some shelters might have designed a tab for the danger assessment, so if that's the case, ignore what I just said and go with whatever your OT administrator tells you, but many shelters use the activity list to enter danger assessment information for women. Oh, and look, it's already popped up. But basically, if I choose to enroll in an activity, hold on, let me minimize that. So if I choose enroll in an activity, I get this pop-up window. So it shows me that I'm entering, I'm creating an enrollment for Marge, and then I have the option to search through a big list of activities, and I've got all of these filter options. So it's nice, I've got a little red alert here telling me that right now I have filtered this list, and so I'm not seeing the full list of activities. So if I delete my filters here, so you'll see I've entered danger into the description, and I had an end date entered, and that's the reason why I was just seeing this short little list. If I now clear out all of those filters and hit go, I see a big long list of 56 activities that I can enroll in. So when I'm looking at this list, I can choose to sort it. So if I want to sort it in reverse alphabetical order, I can do so. I can search for it. This is in alphabetical order. I can type in part of the activity description to get that smaller list. So there are a lot of ways that I can manage that bigger list of activities to find what I'm looking for. So once I click on the danger assessment, which is what we're hoping to complete here, the activity pops up, and I can enter all the data I need. So this is a combined activity. We've got the danger assessment questionnaire, we've got the danger assessment calendar, and then not everybody's collecting that. And we've got the domestic violence survivor assessment, and your shelter may or may not collect that as well. So I will want to modify the date. So we'll go back to that March 29th date. This is the date that I completed the survey or the danger assessment. I want to assign my name to it. I would, if it's your shelter's practice to answer all of the questions, you will do so. Some shelters just enter the total score, and that's perfectly okay as well. Just do whatever your shelter does as far as the standard practice is concerned. So I'll enter a score of 35, which is pretty high. I'm not concerned with the danger assessment calendar in this case, so I'm going to scroll past it. I am not concerned with the DVSA in this case either, but what I am concerned with is this enrollment link question, which is now at the bottom of the activity. So if I had more than one admission listed here, I'd want to make sure that I'm linking this danger assessment to the appropriate activity. And if I'm all done, I can hit update and close. And now my danger assessment shows up in the bottom here. And for some reason my name didn't show up, but it's probably because I filled out a different field than the provider field. Okay, so I'll just, without going through all of the data entry for these, I'll just show you some of the ones that are commonly used in this list so that you know what to find and what to enter under the activity list. So we have the danger assessment in DVSA. We have the goal attainment activity that is used by second stage shelters. So this is probably something that you will want to, you might be using frequently. We have the impact of events scale, and that is also commonly used with the second stage shelters. We have, let's see, we have the PSI, the Parenting Stress Index. So the PSI is used by many shelters and is also one of the tools that is used in the second stage shelter project. So keep that in mind. We have the Women's Emergency Shelter Client Feedback Survey. So not all shelters enter this, but if your shelter does, this is one of the most widely used outcome measurement tools in Outcome Tracker. So this is where you'll find it as well. And those are the big ones, really. If there's anything you're not sure where to find, please contact your OT administrator, and if they can't find it, they can give me a shout as well, and we can find it together. Okay. Okay, so lastly, we're going to circle back. Let me just have a quick look, make sure I didn't miss anything. I did not miss anything. Awesome. Yeah, see, we've got some extra tabs in here, but don't worry about those. Oh, the case note printing tab. This is actually quite helpful for you to know as well. And I'm sorry that we have so many tabs in here. We do a lot of experimenting. So there's a lot of stuff that won't be relevant to your site that you'll see here as well. This appears to be loading very slowly. Okay, let's go to documents first, and then we can go back to the case note printing tab. So not all shelters necessarily use this, but this tab allows you to upload scanned documents. So you might want to scan the original, like an original, say, faxed referral that you received, or maybe some third-party documents. Your shelter might track those using the Documents tab, and this is where you can go ahead and upload those by browsing and it'll pull up a list of all of your files, and you can upload them here, and then they will be saved in Outcome Tracker on your client's record. So I'll try that case note printing tab one more time. If we can't open it, I would just suggest asking your OT admin about it. Many shelters use that tab to print all of the case notes they've entered when a woman's discharged, and then they include those in a paper file before they archive it. So yeah, it doesn't appear to be loading, so I'm not going to spend. I'm sensitive to our time right now because I know we've been at this a couple hours. Oh, here we go. Great. So basically, I can select the date range. So if I were printing to close Marge's file, I could enter her admission date, and then her discharge date, and then select if it was for one specific program, I can choose that program here, or I could highlight them all. You have the option to choose as many as you'd like to print as a group. And now I've got all two of my case notes here for Marge. So I've got the date of the note, the actual gibberish note that I typed, my information, the enrollment. So this is the unique identifier that's associated with that admission form that I created for Marge, and then the program name. So I can go ahead and click print, I think. Oh, it's connecting. And then that will create a printer-friendly version of my case notes that I can print off and put in her file once it's closed. So I'm not going to wait for this, but that is what the case note printing tab is for. So let's go back to her discharge form. So Marge stayed 2 days with us. Today is March 30th, her discharge date. Because she only has one intake form, a discharge is pretty straightforward. But when you are discharging a woman from shelter, what you have to do is make sure that the blue arrow and the admission that you created is listed here. So for instance, I see that the admission that I created on March 28th, 2016 to the residential program is highlighted, which is good because that's the program that I want to discharge her from. We'll get to this next, but we're going to talk about when a woman is admitted to many programs or has more than one admission to the same program, how we have to treat her discharges. We have to be quite careful to ensure that we discharge her from the right program at the right time. So again, a lot of this information is defaulted. I will choose my name here. This one isn't red, but you see the provincial reporting requirement. We do require the discharge date, which we'll put as today. We need the reason for discharge. So we have two options. For the reason for discharge, we have chose to leave. So when a woman chooses to leave, we then have some choices. So she chose to leave because she completed the program and met her goals. She found another program, or we supported her to find another program that was better suited to her needs. Or she did not complete the program or meet her goals, but she chose to leave anyway. And these are your options for that. If she was asked to leave, we want just a bit more information. I should just make sure actually, yes. So I'm double checking that I removed all the data I might have entered here before I go back to this first question and change my response to was asked to leave. So we want to know the reason why she was asked to leave. Is it because we were unable to extend her program stay? So did she stay the maximum allowed time? So let's say 21 days, just as an example. Was she asked to leave because we were unable to accommodate her needs? So did we ask her to leave or pursue another program? Or was she unable to meet our shelter policy requirements? So that will probably look different at every shelter, so I won't really elaborate on that one too much. And then there's the other option. And in the case of other, we just ask for a brief explanation to be provided. We're also interested in the types of service provided in the course of contact. So this is where we will go back through our case notes, or we would review that case notes printing tab to get a sense of all of the services we provided her while she stayed at the shelter. So, you know, I recall we had safety planning in there, some transportation, and you'll see that the detail list here is populating. So we did formal safety plans, we paid for her transportation, we completed an intake assessment, and we also did case planning. So anyway, as you choose different options from this type of service provided, you'll be asked for more detail. You can complete this question at your discretion and at your shelter's discretion. This isn't a question that that is required for any reporting or that we aggregate provincially. And then we're also interested in referrals made. So what external services did you access to meet a woman's needs? So maybe addictions counseling, maybe employment counseling, housing services, and let's say we supported with subsidized housing. So now we have living arrangements after discharge. So we're interested in understanding a bit more about a woman's destination when she is discharged from shelter. So again, we have those questions about returning to abuser. Did she find accommodation on her own, with or without her children? Is she undecided as to where she will live, but is choosing to maybe leave anyway? Did she find accommodation with friends or family? Yeah. And again, that other option will give you the option to specify if nothing in this list quite fits. So let's just choose with friends. And there's a number of questions here that may or may not apply to your shelter. We're just going to focus on those ones that are associated with our provincial data set. And again, we have that enrollment link question, but we don't have anything to link it to, so we can just go ahead and save. Okay. So that is basically the basic process for a standard, I guess we'll call it a term of service. So the data entry associated with a term of service for a woman with one stay in the shelter. Now, we are going to go through two additional scenarios after we take a quick question break, because I do see some questions popping up. So we're going to just look at what does it look like when Marge returns to shelter and for a second time. And then what does it look like when Marge enters an outreach program provided by my shelter? And actually, okay, so before I take that break that I just mentioned, I realized that I did miss one quick thing. We've been quite focused on Marge, and one thing we forgot to do, you'll remember that we admitted Marge with Bart, her son. And we haven't completed any data entry for Bart. Well, Bart will have his own intake and discharge that will need to be completed. And I will show you those tabs. The process is completely the same, so I don't think that we need to go into it very in depth. And our reporting and data collection requirements for kids are pretty minimal. So I'll just show you quickly. We are on Bart's intake form. So again, we'll want to backdate his intake. choose the appropriate program name that your shelter is designated for this program, and the emergency residential type of program. His admission date, oops, and his birth date, and that's it. That's all that's required. That's all that's required for BART. So the same process applies as far as discharging BART, so choosing the appropriate discharge date, documenting services we provided, referrals we provided, and we can save that as well. Oops. That's what happens when you miss a data entry field. You get the red box. So this is all saved, and then you have the same options to document activities, case notes, just as we did in Marge's record. And again, link back to Marge's record at any time using the Relationships tab. Okay, break time. Let's take maybe just a minute or so and let anyone who has a question take a minute to type it out, and then we'll review some of the questions that did come up while we were discharging Marge. Okay. Jen?
Yes. Looks like you've got one question here. I don't see any others.
Okay.
But this question is, on drop-down list for reason for discharge, would it be possible to have client met some goals?
That's a good question. So that brings up really more of a bigger question. So, and we can talk a bit about, so these questions that are all bolded and red, these questions were developed by your shelter directors. So they worked collaboratively for like 3 years to come up with the definitions and the response choices for all of these questions. And because all of that work, and then they worked with Human Services, the ministry, the provincial ministry, and other partners to kind of confirm that the choices that they had made were satisfying everybody's needs. So because of that, when we want to propose changes to these questions, we kind of have to honor that process by proposing the changes to a group of directors called our Shelter Directors Data Committee. So what they do is they review proposed changes and present recommendations based on their review process to the directors, and then the directors would vote on it. So these kinds of changes get presented to the directors, sometimes via email, sometimes at shelter directors meetings. So it's a bit of a process to make changes, but we always welcome feedback on the data elements and whether or not they're working. It's just that shelters themselves cannot make changes to those questions themselves. one, and two, that when we do make changes, they take a bit of time to make. So that was kind of a really long answer, but it's certainly possible. I can't answer whether or not we could make that specific change to that question because of the process we have to go through with our directors to make the change.
And you've had one more come in. If you fill out the client feedback survey and outcome, does it go with your month-end reports?
It does not at this time. I think that is something that's being considered. Not all shelters are entering the client feedback survey into Outcome Tracker, so we aren't able to just go ahead and make it electronic without working with individual shelters to get everybody using the electronic version of the tool. So at this time, I believe those feedback surveys are submitted manually, so they're mailed to somebody at Human Services, and they aggregate the results themselves. So at this time, yeah, they're not included in the month ends.
Okay, that was your last question for this topic.
Cool. Okay, so let's go back to, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go back to like our starting point. So let's go back to the People Organizations tab, and let's just kind of go through the scenario where Marge is a returning client to shelter. So we'll open up her record. And the first place we will go is to her roles tab. So because we have active roles for Marge, when she comes back to shelter, we have no need to create a new role for her at all. We can just leave these roles open if need be. Some shelters may do this differently, and so if that's the case, just ignore me. But generally speaking, once a role is created, it can just stay open unless it is a child role that no longer applies to a woman who is now 18, for instance. But generally speaking, they can just stay open. We will likely have another call contact from Marge that we would have to complete. And again, I will create this call contact using the copy feature. So we can assume that Marge's request for admission is going to be quite similar to the one we just documented. That may not be the case, but if that is the case, you can use the copy feature to create a copy of this form. Hit OK. And once that copy is made, you just have to go through and review all the data you've entered, and update anything that may have changed. So Marge may now live at 188 Home Lane. So we could update her address information. We could update the date the call was received, but we're not going to because we can't date it into the future. The length of the call may have changed, but a lot of the information will be the same. So again, she is admitted to the program. We don't need to change that. So that's great. We'll hit save. So now you'll see that we have two call contacts, virtually identical because of the information that's used to identify them here. You can also create a new call contact from scratch. So your shelter director and your OT administrator may prefer that you build your call contacts from scratch just because you may make fewer errors this way. So it's really your shelter's preference as to how you go about this. But you would have to go through every question again as opposed to being able to copy some of your responses from your previous questions. So. Okay, so we've got that call contact created. And now we'll move to the residential intake form. So the same principles apply. If much of the information on the intake form has not changed, you are free to copy the original intake form and then just update any data that has changed between her first stay and her second stay. So that's what I will do in this case. I've created that copy, and I will just review all of those important questions. So everything has stayed the same. Marge is still coming in. We could say this time she is coming in by herself, so Bart is not joining her. So she's no longer a primary family member. Still a member of Region 3. Her admission date has changed, so now she's coming in March 30th. We'll want to update that. Much of this information won't change, but it's good to review it carefully just in case. In the interest of time, I'm going a bit quickly because I know I've kept you guys for quite a while. Types of abuse may have changed, etc., etc. And we will hit save. Okay. So I'll just show you here now. Again, we've got the list on the right. Now we've got the 2 admissions listed here. And so when you go back to review data that was entered on these tabs, you'll want to be mindful that you are looking at the right admission because now there's more than one. So you could accidentally be looking at old information that's no longer relevant if you're not mindful of which admission you've selected over on the right here. So now we'll move to the Discharge tab, and you'll realize that that's very important when it comes to discharging as well. So on the Discharge tab, we never copy. We do not create copies. We have to complete discharges from scratch, and that is because the form, in a way, the discharge form is already created when an admission form is created because all of that information gets linked together. And so when we complete the discharge, we're actually not creating a new form at all. So we never want to create select new residential or copy. We want to select that intake form that we've already created and complete the discharge information for that specific intake. So if I accidentally went back to her March 28th, if I clicked on the March 28th admission to complete the discharge information, I would accidentally overwrite all of this work, and it would be incorrect. I'd have the wrong date associated with that intake. I'd have, maybe the wrong services and referrals, so it would be all wrong. So I have to be very sure that I'm choosing the right intake from the list on the right to fill out the discharge form. So we'll just go through, look for those red highlighted fields that are required very quickly and hit save. Great. Okay, so that is how to treat multiple admissions into a single program. Now I'll just point out on the Case Notes tab that you'll remember that enrollment link question. So if I were to create a new case note and I'd fill out my case note, you'll notice down here in the enrollment link I now have 2 options in terms of linking my case note to a woman's stay in shelter. And so I just want to make sure that from this list I choose the appropriate intake to link this contact to. when I create it. And the same will apply to any activities that you add through the activity list. So when you create your danger assessment so Marge will complete a new danger assessment this time. You'll want to make sure that her total score and all of the data she provided this time is linked to her admission associated with this stay in shelter and not her previous stay. Okay. So the last thing we're going to do is look at how to manage a woman's record. So we'll manage Marge's record when she's in more than one program. But before we do that, I do see a few questions popping up. So why don't we just go ahead and answer these questions and see if any more pop up. And if they do, we can either catch them now or catch them at our next break. So go ahead, Jen.
So your first one is, do clients have the right to view their file in Outcome Tracker?
That's a good question. I think that is a bit more of a shelter-specific question in that, like, a lot of shelters have their own policies. Like, clients have a right to view their files. Whether or not they can access Outcome Tracker to do so would really depend on your shelter, because they would technically have access or be able to see somebody else's information inadvertently. So you don't want to breach another woman's confidentiality by giving somebody access to Outcome Tracker. It might be that you would make their records available to them in hard copy, or yeah, I would consult your ED, or if you have like a shelter supervisor, about what your policies are around that. And just say that I'd be cautious about letting a woman into Outcome Tracker. I don't think, and the system is really set up for that.
And your next one is it correct that for every call contact that is entered, you must have a role entered?
That's a good question. It's not incorrect to have a new role entered every time somebody calls, but it won't, as long as if you just wanted to have one caller role, for instance, and have 10 call contacts for a woman, as long as the caller role begin date matched the earliest call contact date, then it wouldn't affect your reporting at all. You could just have the one. But if you're, like, say you created the caller role for March 30th of this year, and you had a call contact for, December of 2015, some of your reports wouldn't catch that December 2015 call contact, because the role date doesn't doesn't fall before it or match it. Does that make sense? So you can do the one, it just has to have a begin date that will fall before all of your call contacts for it to work.
Okay, that looks like that's it for the questions.
Cool. Okay. So now our last scenario will be to admit Marge to the outreach program. So she's now going to enter into outreach. And our first step will be to once again go to her roles, because we have a new role and new data entry tabs we need to access to track her outreach information. So I'm going to go to Add. I will select her role. She'll be Outreach Follow-Up Adult, and we'll use today's begin date again and hit Add. Okay. So now you'll see we have our residential intake adult, residential discharge adult, and then we have an outreach follow-up intake and an outreach follow-up discharge. So I will go to her outreach follow-up intake. And yeah, you'll see that in our version of this form, it is somewhat shortened. So these are the only questions that are really required of outreach in terms of reporting. So we've kept the form pretty minimal, but your shelter may have added additional questions to track more information than what's shown here. But for simplicity's sake, we can create complete these questions as we have on all the other forms. She will be a single client this time. She is not a primary family member. She was referred from the emergency DV shelter, we'll say. And we'll say no, no, and I believe we said 1 to 2 years. So I'll save that information. So the way we have set the outreach follow-up intake tab up is that we're only able to see on this form our outreach intake, but some shelters will actually see both their outreach information and their residential information on the same tab, and that's because for many shelters these programs are so related that they often share tabs and they share a lot of the same data elements. So it's just important to keep in mind that if you are seeing a list that includes both admissions to residential programs as well as, oh, here, I just noticed a mistake. I set the program name to residential, but I actually want it to be outreach follow-up. So I'm just going to update that. And now you see that this description is changed to admitted on March 30th to the outreach follow-up program. So I'll show you, because I think it'll show up on the residential intake adult. Now that we are on this tab, and we've created that outreach follow-up intake, if you go to the right, no, it's not showing it. Okay, it'll show it on the discharge tab. So we've completed her intake. We have the same case notes tab in most cases. Your shelter may have different case notes, but a lot of the other data entry, the workflow is very similar. You would enter case notes under the case notes tab. And again, you'd want to be mindful down here that you are linking her new case notes to her outreach follow-up intake as opposed to her previous residential intakes. And the same would go in terms of accessing the activity list. That would all remain the same. So there may be different activities that you're using with women in outreach, but the process remains the same. The most important thing that we have to be careful of when we have women in more than one program is on the discharge tab. So this is where you will notice that I see on the right here both of her residential intakes as well as her outreach follow-up. And it's very, very easy to accidentally enter her outreach discharge information onto one of her residential intakes by mistake. And so you have to be very careful to select the appropriate intake from that list before entering the discharge information. Let's say family events information line and hit save. So again, I just will emphasize always making a point to, when you open up a tab, just have a look at that list on the right and ensure that you have the right version of that form open before you make any changes or add anything in terms of data. Okay, that's it. We're done, except for questions, of course. So we'll do the last sort of 2-minute break to give everybody a chance to submit any final questions, and then we'll review them and you will be done. That will be all. So I'll set my timer for 2 minutes and we'll let you know when that time's up. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for all of the questions and for being so engaged. I know that was a bit of a long haul, but hopefully we've at least given you enough information to get you started on your work in the database, and we are happy to supplement this training with any questions or answers to any questions that might come up for you as you're practicing and getting used to using the database. I just want to remind you of a few things that we touched on at the beginning of the presentation. So just a reminder that I based this training on sort of what was standard design in Outcome Tracker, but many of you might see things a little bit differently in your own shelter sites. So please do touch base with your OT administrators if things don't really match. So if something I've said doesn't really fit for you, and they can help you apply or work within their own processes or your shelter's own processes as opposed to what I've presented here. I will also remind you of some resources. So again, we have the Outcome Tracker Manual that was included as a handout in this presentation that you can download to your computer. It's also available on the ACWS website. We will have new versions of the manual uploaded to the ACWS website very soon, as well as a copy of this training video that you can refer to at any time if you need a refresher on something that we've covered. And then there's also VistaShare support resources in Outcome Tracker that you can access as well if you need some additional information. Again, just a reminder of the OT support protocol. Please do your best to troubleshoot some of the issues you encounter around logging in, and use the resources that are available to you. Your next step would be to contact your shelter's OT administrator. And if they are not able to identify a solution for you, they can contact us and we will get back to them within 1 business day with our best attempt to support you both with the issue. And then as a last resort, if we can't solve the problem, we will contact VistaShare on behalf of everybody. And that's just to help us minimize our costs collectively as a network on support, so that we do our best to fix it ourselves before we go to VistaShare. So that's all. It doesn't look like we've had any new questions or comments come up. You guys will get a pop-up with an evaluation. I know you're probably hungry, so the evaluation will also be included in a follow-up email that you'll receive after the webinar is complete. So feel free to fill it out either now or later. We're happy to receive it at any time. Okay? Thank you, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you very soon. Do you want to add anything, Jen, before I sign off?
No, Kat, I think that's it. Thank you for doing that. That was a great presentation.
Oh, thank you. Okay, talk soon. Bye.